History is a perfect place to tell a story, but often enough, Hollywood will take the story that history has already given us and mess around with it for the sake of a good story, character, political statement, or just to sell cute dresses to impressionable children. Now, just because a film isn't historically accurate doesn't automatically mean the movie's bad. There are plenty of films that take artistic liberties with historical events, and they turn out pretty good. Saving Private Ryan takes liberties with its history and characters, and despite this, it's considered one of the best films of all time. But I think historical accuracy is something you judge on a movie-by-movie basis. Some movies can get away with it, others can't. Today, we're going to be looking at Pocahontas and Pocahontas 2, Journey to the New World. Both movies focus on the young chiefess Pocahontas, whose name became well known throughout the world thanks to her harrowing experiences and diplomatic skills. But of course, Disney decided instead to shake things up a bit for the sake of selling very pretty dresses to kids, and also to hopefully have a financially successful film. Funny how the film would almost entirely stop the Disney Renaissance in its tracks, but hey, we're looking at just the history today. I've already reviewed both of these movies in the past, and after doing my research on Pocahontas in general, let me just say... Just throw those reviews in the garbage, please, will you? These movies are actually far worse when you take the actual history into account, and that's what we're going to be doing today. And there's a lot of history to get into, so with that being said, let's get started. Also, I apologize if things are out of order in this video. I like to address the history as we reach it in the film. So yeah, forgive me if the history is kind of all over the place in this video, because don't blame me, blame the movie. Funny how the film about Pocahontas doesn't start off with Pocahontas. I guess I will. Okay, so no one really knows exactly when Pocahontas was born, but historians believe it was in the year 1596. Actually, I think I figured it out. So, the movie doesn't start off with Pocahontas, because even Pocahontas didn't start off as Pocahontas. In Native American culture, it is believed that as people grow up, their names would change to help reflect their personalities. When Pocahontas was born, her birth name was actually Amanute, and as she developed into a child, her father then changed her name to Matoka.
Yeah, they had us the first half, I'm not gonna lie.
Pocahontas would actually be more of a nickname for her that the locals of her tribe would use to describe her. In Powhatan culture, Pocahontas actually translates to playful one. You can actually see that kind of behavior in the film, like when she jumps off that big cliff and gets into a splash fight with her friend. Yeah, too bad she couldn't keep that personality throughout the rest of the film. Then she might have actually been a fun character to watch. By the time Pocahontas turned 14, she was now an official adult in the tribe, and by that time, she was now allowed to decide her own name. She would choose Pocahontas because it was a name that her mother liked.
Hey, look, is that Smith?
That's him, all right, the old sea dog.
I've heard some amazing stories about him. Are you coming on this voyage too?
That's right. I'm not about to let you boys have all the fun.
Okay, so now we're being introduced to Captain John Smith. The real Captain John Smith was believed to be born in the year 1580, and by the time he was recruited to venture into the New World, he had already lived a pretty adventurous life. He had served as a mercenary under King Henry IV during the Dutch Revolt. He would fight alongside the Holy Roman Empire against the Ottoman Empire during the 13 Years' War, where he would earn his title of captain. And at one point, he reportedly killed and beheaded 3 Ottoman soldiers in single-hand combat. His victories would earn him a knighthood from the Prince of Transylvania, Sigismund Bathory. He would even be given his own horse and even his own coat of arms. But the story doesn't end there. In 1602, Captain Smith would claim that he was captured by Crimean soldiers and sold into slavery. He would be sold to a Turkish nobleman who would then send him as a gift to a Greek mistress, a woman by the name of... Oh! Don't worry, she never comes up again anyway. John Smith would eventually escape his captors and return to London. On his coat of arms would also come a Latin quote he would carry for the rest of his life. Vincere est venvir, which in Latin meant, to conquer is to live. I can see why they didn't bring that up in the movie, because, yeah, that would have sent some pretty mixed messages, wouldn't it?
Trouble on deck.
Governor Ratcliffe.
Thomas fell overboard, sir.
Thank heavens he's been successfully retrieved. Well done, Smith.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so now we're meeting Governor Ratcliffe. Now, not much is really known about him before the journey to the New World, other than the fact that he was born in the year 1549, and the fact that his original name was John Sycamore. Yeah, now Sycamore made him sound pretty weak, so he would change his name to Ratcliffe because it sounded a lot more macho. Ratcliffe would become the president of Jamestown in the year 1608, but we are getting way too ahead of ourselves, okay? We'll talk more about him when the movie gets there. One thing I will bring up now, though, is how there's only one boat we see in the movie. In real life, there were 3 boats. Since Ratcliffe is in charge of this boat, that means this is likely the Discovery. The other 2 boats were called the Susan Constance and the Godspeed. Kind of weird that this movie just ignored those 2 other boats for no reason, but okay. And fun fact, these 3 boats are the ones you see on the back of the Virginia quarter. Pretty neat, huh?
Quoquam has asked to seek your hand in marriage.
Marry Kocoum?
I told him it would make my heart soar.
But he's so serious.
Ha! It's funny you say that, Pocahontas, because apparently you're into that. Oh yeah. Okay, so not long after becoming an adult, she would actually marry a member of the tribe named Kocoum. And the 2 would even have a daughter of their own, a daughter by the name of Kaoki. Huh. Well, I guess you could say he put the poke in Pocahontas, am I right?
Oh, you stink!
Your mother wore this for our wedding. It was her dream to see you wear it at your own. It suits you.
Yes, your mother. Mother number... let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7...
2 hours later.
5, 6, 8, 7... Wait, was she from the Trundle tribe or from the... I lost count. God damn it! Okay, so the Powhatan tribe is actually made up of over 30 smaller tribes, all surrounding the area of eastern Virginia. The smaller tribes had their own rules, and even their own chiefs. Of course, they all answered back to Chief Powhatan by the end of the day, or as his real name was, Wahunsinuka. There's a joke that can be made there, and it is... so damn tempting, it really is. Now, in these times, a man of the tribe could have multiple wives, and this was seen as a symbol of wealth as it was the man's job to provide. In the tribe, if you couldn't afford a wife, you didn't get a wife. Period. Chief Powhatan, being the grand chief of it all, had possibly over 100 different wives, all from the surrounding tribes. Despite this though, women were allowed to have extramarital affairs if the husband allowed, which usually they did. The chief wanted to make sure the tribe would become as big as possible, and with an estimated 14,000 to 21,000 members by 1607, I'd say mission accomplished. But to have a child with the Grand Chief was seen as a great honor for the women who did. They would be chosen due to being seen as the most beautiful or most intelligent. This way, the chief's offspring would carry with them the best traits of the tribe, as it was believed that the child would carry the traits of the parents after they were born. There's actually very little known about Pocahontas' real mother. We don't even have a real name for her, but what we do know is that reportedly, Chief Powhatan did have a soft spot for her, and she was apparently his favorite wife. Take that for what you will. She was the one who wanted to name her daughter Pocahontas, as she apparently really just liked the name. It's unknown exactly what happened to her, but it is believed that she died of childbirth. So for once, when it comes to dead mothers, Disney was on the money with that. Pocahontas also technically wasn't a princess, much to Disney's annoyance, I'm betting. She also had many half-brothers and sisters throughout the tribes, and likely she never would have become chief. The Powhatan power dynamic was very complicated, and I don't have the time in this video to go into that well, because boy is it deep!
I've never been popular, man.
I like you.
And don't think I don't know what those backstabbers at court say about me.
Oh, yes, all that talk about being a pathetic social climber who's failed at everything.
I'm very well aware. When King James sees the gold these peasants unearth, success will be mine at last.
Hell of a line read right there. Okay, so in the movie, Ratcliffe brings up the fact that he's not very popular in court. This is probably in reference to the fact that he would become a very unpopular president in Jamestown. In 1608, he and John Smith would work together to depose the then president of Jamestown, a man by the name of Edward Wingfield, who was discovered to be hoarding food that the colonists needed. After that, he would become the president of Jamestown, but would soon begin to exploit his power. In a time of sickness and death, Ratcliffe would order his men to build a large cabin for him in the woods, separate from Jamestown. This meant having the men leave the safety of Jamestown and risk being attacked by the natives, also that Ratcliffe could have a bit more privacy. This cabin would be dubbed appropriately by the colonists as Ratcliffe's Palace. So yeah, that is a bit like his character in the movie, But another interesting bit on why he would become so unpopular was actually his treatment of the natives. But we'll get into that when we do.
Nampinaman. They prowl the earth like ravenous wolves, consuming everything in their path.
I will lead our warriors to the river and attack. We will destroy these invaders the way we destroyed the Massawomics.
Kocoum. In that battle, we knew how to fight our enemy. But these pale visitors are strange to us. Let us hope they do not intend to stay.
Okay, so I doubt that magic visions and the fire were a thing, but Chief Paladin was actually very optimistic about the colonists, believing them as potential allies for future wars against other tribes. John Smith would actually be the one in charge of these meetings between the two groups. However, relations began to go south after John Smith asked the chief to pledge his allegiance to King James I. But why would the Grand Chief pledge his allegiance to King James I? Why would he pledge his allegiance to anybody? He's the Grand Chief. He can do whatever he wants. From this point on, relations would proceed to get worse and worse and worse. In the beginning, Chief Paladin took pity on the colonists who were unprepared and viewed as rather incompetent. So the natives would give the colonists gifts of food as a gesture of peace. However, the natives would later report that they were apparently appalled by the colonists' bad behavior. They never even said thank you. Eventually, in a time of starvation, Chief Paladin would put his own people first and decided to stop all trade. He had hoped the colonists would be starved into submission and leave, but little did he realize just how dangerous a desperate white man can be.
I hereby claim this land and all its riches in the name of His Majesty King James I, and do so name this settlement Jamestown.
Okay, tiny little thing here, that's the wrong flag. That red X on the flag actually represents the country of Ireland, but that flag wouldn't exist until 1801, a whopping nearly 200 years in the future, at a time when this land wouldn't even be England's anymore.
Let's not forget what the Spanish found when they came to the New World. Gold. Mountains of it.
Yeah, they wouldn't find any. Also, that's not even the main reason they went there. Finding gold was actually more of a side mission, to be frank. The real idea that King James had with all of these voyages and stuff was to try and find a quicker route to India. Yeah, India was the king of the spice trade at the time, and England still wanted to try and find a quicker route to it. I mean, they were called the Virginia Trading Company, after all.
We'll kill ourselves an engine, or maybe 2 or 3. We're stalwart men in bold of the Virginia Company.
Yeah, that would sound clunky in a song, wouldn't it? But, as we all know, there is a lot of land here, and, yeah, it wasn't happening. At least until this thing got made.
These beasts invade our shores. And now this. We will fight this enemy, but we cannot do it alone. We will call on our brothers to help us fight. These white men are dangerous.
Probably the most accurate line in this film.
I shouldn't be here.
I want to see you again.
I can't.
Please, don't leave.
I'm sorry. I have to go.
Yeah, probably the biggest inaccuracy about this whole film. John Smith and Pocahontas were never a thing. Pocahontas was estimated to be somewhere between the age of 8 and 11 when John Smith arrived in Jamestown. And although around this time, it was perfectly cool to marry 15-year-olds, 11-year-olds was just a touch too shy to be that appropriate. Just a touch, though. It wasn't that big of a deal. However, John Smith would describe in his writings that he was rather fond of the young girl. Not in a creepy romantic sense, but sort of a, she's very quirky and kind of interesting. Who'd have thunk it? When she was young, Pocahontas would come with Paladin envoys to Jamestown, and her presence meant that they came in peace. She actively interacted with the colonists, talking to them, teasing them, all around just being her typical playful self. And since she was a little girl, most of the colonists really weren't all that bothered by it. John Smith would describe the young Pocahontas as rather charming and witty for her age. By the time Pocahontas turned 14, John Smith had actually returned to London, but Pocahontas believed that he had actually died. They would meet again in England, however, but we'll get to that when the movie does.
Let it break upon you like a wave upon the sand. Hello, John Smith.
Hey, Pocahontas. I think those berries you gave me are starting to kick in. Either that or this is totally fake and didn't actually happen. You know, just in case anyone was confused about the talking tree.
We will eliminate these savages once and for all.
No, you can't do that.
They don't want to feed us, your ninnies. They want to kill us. All of us. Murderous thieves. There's no room for their kind in civilized society.
But this is their land.
This is my land.
Okay, I take that last part back. That is the most accurate line in this movie. On top of that, John Smith and Ratcliffe actually did fight quite a bit in their time in Jamestown. As a matter of fact, at one point on the way to Jamestown, John Smith would actually be arrested and charged for mutiny. For a brief time, John Smith was actually sentenced to be hanged. However, this would never happen. As it turned out, John Smith was actually appointed on the Jamestown Council, which basically means he was always in charge and no one really knew. Yeah, I don't know how that happens either. Like seriously, how do you go on for so long without even realizing you're in charge?
And I say, anyone who so much as looks at an Indian without killing him on sight will be tried for treason and hanged.
Okay, so there were rules instilled in Jamestown to prevent things like unauthorized trading and people just wandering off because, that's just really stupid and dangerous. For the first few months, trades were often made between the colonists and the Powhatans, with food like corn being traded in exchange for things like shiny trinkets, which the natives had never seen before. However, over time, the natives would soon learn that to them, these trinkets were worthless and felt that they had been cheated. On top of that, a combination of a terrible drought and a bad winter made trading food near impossible for the Powhatans. And I think we all know how white people react when they have their privileges taken away from them. John Ratcliffe actually wanted to treat the natives fairly and tried to establish a peaceful relationship between them and the colonists. Many colonists, however, believed that he was trading very valuable items to the natives, like guns, and believed that he was the one getting the raw end of the deal. Racism, of course, might have played a part in that. They would accuse him of making unequal trades and as such depose him of his presidency and replace him with someone who would be harder on the natives. However, he would still remain in Jamestown and actively fought to try and keep the peace. Unfortunately, his efforts would be in vain. And it wouldn't even help him in the end. Sometime between December of 1609 and January of 1610, Ratcliffe and some men would go to make trade with some local Pamunkey Indians. However, it would turn out to be a trap, and all but 2 of the men would be captured. It's unknown exactly what happened to the others, or how many there really were, but John Ratcliffe in particular would suffer a gruesome fate. He would be tied to a tree, where the women of the tribe would take mussel shells and use them to peel the skin off of his body. They would then take his flayed skin off and then throw it into a fire, believing it would cause him more pain. Finally, after peeling the skin off of his face, the rest of his body would then be thrown in, finally ending the pain.
Thomas. Is he?
You killed him.
So yeah, Kokum is dead. And I can't say anything about it right now because historically we actually haven't gotten to that point yet. Like we'll get to it eventually. Like I said, don't blame me, blame the movie. They're the ones taking the shit out of order, not me! Not me! Okay, so John Smith has finally been captured. This may have happened. Historians often debate whether or not he was actually captured, or if he simply misinterpreted some form of cultural greeting. Either way, John Smith's telling of the story would eventually lead us to the scene that is Pocahontas saving his life. And if my research is correct, that never happened. Period. For starters, as I said before, Pocahontas was somewhere between 8 and 11 years old at the time, which meant she would have been deliberately kept far away from any execution. Secondly, the Powhatans would never result to beating someone to death. They were more likely to result in, well, what they did to Ratcliffe. And thirdly, and most effectively, John Smith, for the rest of his life, would give multiple accounts of his experiences in the New World. However, he would strangely keep this one particular event a secret until the year 1624, years after both Pocahontas and John Rolfe were both dead. That is strangely coincidental, isn't it? Many historians often argue the actual legitimacy of John Smith's accounts, and there's honestly a pretty good chance that all of it is bullshit. Just complete bullshit. John Smith was described as a complete blowhard by his fellow colonists. He was prideful, a show-off, and thought way too highly of himself. From that princess he was enslaved to, up to Pocahontas saving his life, odds are he did a lot of embellishing to try and make his stories and himself look a lot cooler. And sadly, it kind of worked. His book about his adventures in the New World would go on to become a bestseller. Now, that isn't to say that we all just suddenly believed and accepted all of this until suddenly we didn't. No. As a matter of fact, for centuries, many historians debated on how accurate John's book was. Even at the time of the book's release, it received rather mixed reception from audiences, and even some of his former crewmates called him out on this. It wouldn't be until sometime in the 1800s would expansionists in America romanticize his work, because as stories go, it sounded romantic, and as they would say themselves, and I quote, "It's what should have happened." Gross.
Fine, I'll settle this myself. No! John!
Okay, John Smith was injured and forced to go back to England. That did happen. Of course, it wasn't because he heroically saved Chief Paladin from a bullet. It would be because he blew himself up. The colonists often kept a bag of gunpowder tied to their belts in case they needed to, well, you know.
What you say? That you only meant well.
But John Smith decided to keep the bag around his neck for some reason. Yeah. Not a good place to be when you're smoking a pipe. One thing leads to another, and he would survive his injuries, but his pride would never be the same. So now that the first movie has ended, we now move on to the next one, Journey to the New World. And well, let's just say this one is definitely inaccurate. In this movie, John Rolfe comes to the New World as an ambassador for King James I and is on a mission to bring the chief to England. Of course, Pocahontas volunteers to go in his place for the sake of peace. Of course, John Rolfe was never an ambassador of any kind. John Rolfe in real life was a tobacco planter, credited for having the first successful tobacco plantation in the New World. He was born sometime in the year 1585 and came to the New World sometime in June of 1610. Around this time, Jamestown was struggling with disease and starvation, and the Paladins were attacking any colonists who tried to leave the town. But it was the boats that John Rolfe was on that brought much-needed supplies to Jamestown that saved it from total destruction. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, I'll let you decide, but yeah, that's history for you. It's not a pretty thing, and it doesn't care about happily ever after, because now we've reached the capture and bondage of Pocahontas. In the late summer of 1609, the First Anglo-Paladin War had begun. To oversimplify, Chief Paladin asked the colonists to come to the tribe for talks of peace. They were asked not to bring any weapons as a sign of trust, but the colonists refused. It's unknown exactly what happened or who shot first, but either way, shots were fired and the war had begun. The First Anglo-Paladin War would last between 1609 and 1614. Chief Paladin told the colonists that as long as they stayed in their fort, they would be unharmed. They were also allowed to leave on their boat whenever they pleased as well, and at one point they even did, but they would come back with more men and supplies not long after. But we're getting off topic right now. The Anglo-Paladin War was a long and brutal conflict, and it wasn't even the end of conflict between the two sides. Only one thing would end the war, and that would be Pocahontas herself. The year is now 1613, and Pocahontas had reportedly just given birth to her and Kocoum's baby girl, but anyone who's given birth will know she must have been insanely weak at this point. So, when a group of colonists came to the tribe to raid it for food and whatever else they could find, you can imagine the surprise on one man's face, a man by the name of Captain Samuel Argall, when he discovered one of the chief's daughters, weak from birth and vulnerable. He didn't even think twice. Samuel grabbed Pocahontas and brought her back to the boat where she would be locked up and taken hostage. It wouldn't take long for the chief to learn what had happened. The colonists made two demands: for the chief to stop attacking the people, and for the Paladins to return stolen supplies. Now, the chief did stop attacks for a while, but as for the stolen supplies, Well, that's the thing. There were no supplies. Yeah, they had nothing to return. And the colonists knew this. They figured that if they gave the chief an impossible demand, he would be forced to make peace on their terms. But Chief Paladin wouldn't go down so easily, even if his daughter was in jeopardy. Rescue missions would be carried out, one even led by Kocoum himself to save Pocahontas. It was even reported that Kocoum managed to reach the boat that she was on, but sadly, he would be gunned down, failing to save his wife. Pocahontas would remain a hostage for a full year. During that time, Pocahontas would be beaten, tortured, and raped by over 30 different men. During that time, Pocahontas would become pregnant again. In Native American culture, rape was seen as a heinous crime. If you were found to be guilty of rape, you would be met with a slow, brutal, and violent death. In European culture at the time, however, rapists often got away with it. And even if you were found guilty, which didn't happen that often, the worst that would happen was usually short jail sentences or light fines. The colonists knew about the Native Americans' treatment of rapists, and it was only a matter of time before the chief would learn about what had happened. The proof was undeniable. They knew that if Chief Paladin learned about what had happened to his daughter, his wrath would be relentless. If it were up to him, every single colonist in Jamestown would be put on pikes and burnt alive. One man decided that he would take one for the team in order to maintain the peace, and this man was John Rolfe. It's a common misconception that John Rolfe actually loved Pocahontas, and she in return. In reality, John merely married her so that Jamestown could be spared a terrible fate. On top of that, it's been reported that he was actually one of the men who had his way with her, and there's a pretty good chance that Thomas Rolfe wasn't actually his biological child. Pocahontas would be baptized in April of 1614, and then given the new English name, Rebecca. After that, she and John would marry on April 5th, 1614. When the chief heard of the marriage and believed that she had found happiness in Jamestown with John Rolfe, he finally agreed to new peace terms, and a time period known as the Peace of Pocahontas had begun. Sometime later, Pocahontas, John Rolfe, and their son Thomas would leave for England. The second movie takes a lot of liberties compared to the first one, and it's kind of hard to go over in the same way that I did the first. Pocahontas did meet King James I, but unlike in the movie, King James was actually fascinated by her and saw her as an example that perhaps Native Americans weren't savage after all. He thought since Pocahontas had converted to Christianity and was even baptized, then maybe, just maybe, Native Americans had souls after all. Maybe they were even people. Oh. Radcliffe had already been dead for a number of years, so there was no plot by him for revenge or war. John Rolfe and Pocahontas would soon go on tour across England, and Pocahontas and her son were actually used somewhat like props to try and promote peace and tranquility between the Indians and the colonists in Jamestown. Like in the movie, she actually became a bit of a diplomat, and was even successful in keeping the peace throughout her short life. In 1616, Pocahontas would run into John Smith again, surprised to see that he was alive. By this time, she had heard about all of his stories and experiences with the New World and her family and everything. So, instead of running up and hugging him like in the film, instead she slapped him. She saw that he had been lying about her and all of his exploits in the New World, and called him out on it. She would even say, and I quote, "Your countrymen will lie much." She called him a man who wasn't afraid to use force to get what he wanted, and the fact that he's still alive when she was told that he was dead showcased the worst of Europeans. After this encounter, John Smith would leave, and the two would never see each other again. So unlike the movie, they didn't part ways as friends. Rather, Pocahontas hated his guts for lying about her and her family. In 1617, John Rolfe was then made the Secretary of Jamestown and was asked to return. He was hesitant at first, mainly due to the fear that Pocahontas would go and tell the chief about what had happened to her. Pocahontas made it clear to him that she had no such intentions on telling her father the truth, as doing so would destroy the peace between the two groups. So, in March 1617, they sailed off for Jamestown. Sadly though, Pocahontas would never make it. A few days into the trip, she caught a disease that historians still debate to this day what it was. It was likely pneumonia, but smallpox, tuberculosis, and even poisoning have been speculated. Her son Thomas would also get sick, but he would soon recover. The last words recorded by Pocahontas was, "All must die, but for me, it's enough that my son lives." Pocahontas died shortly after. After her death, Pocahontas would be buried in the parish at St. George's Church in Kent Gravesend. The church would be destroyed in a fire in 1727, so it's unknown exactly where her grave is. But in 1957, a statue was made to commemorate the 350th anniversary of her death. The statue still remains there to this day and serves as her official gravesite. After her death, John Rolfe would later abandon Thomas with a friend of his named Louis Stuckley. It was believed that after Pocahontas had died, there was no reason to keep him since he likely wasn't even his. His brother Henry Rolfe, learning what happened, would soon take custody of the boy and even sue John to force him to pay for child support. John Rolfe would later be killed in the Indian Massacre of 1622. John Smith would die on June 21, 1631 at the age of 51. His books would solidify his legacy in the Pocahontas story, but to this day, many historians still debate about the legitimacy of the story, but we've already talked about this. Being the legal son of John Rolfe, Thomas would officially inherit his father's tobacco plantation, and so he would move to Jamestown in 1635. At this time, relations between the Indians and the colonists had completely fallen apart. Multiple wars had broken out, and thousands on both sides were killed. Because of this, Thomas was not allowed to visit the tribe and meet his true family. Whether he ever did in secret or not is entirely unknown. For all we know, he lived a perfectly peaceful life without meeting his tribe. He would marry a woman named Jane Pothras and have one daughter also named Jane. Jane Rolfe would go on to have her own children as well, and Pocahontas still has descendants that live to this day. Even some big names in U.S. politics such as First Lady Edith Wilson and Senator Janine Shawin are descendants of Pocahontas. Chief Powhatan would die in 1618, just a year after his daughter would. After this, a brief power struggle would occur and a new chief would be appointed for the tribe. It would be through this new chief that the Second Anglo-Powhatan War would begin. The fighting would last until 1646 officially, although some historians debate whether the war didn't end until 1677. By then, the colonists were coming to Jamestown in greater numbers. By 1677, the tribes had all scattered and become independent of each other. Multiple tribes would be completely wiped out in these wars. And soon enough, the Native Americans would have to fight for their basic rights and their lands for centuries to come. Pocahontas throughout her lifetime served the people of her tribe. Despite the terrible things that happened to her, she kept her head up and fought through the trauma in order to keep the peace. To this day, people still admire the brave, young woman and see her as a symbol of peace, tolerance, and diplomacy. Her strength in the worst of times and courage in the time of war made her an American icon, but it was her love for her people and her battle to protect her home from invaders that made her a legend. And yes, for anyone who needs to be told this, she was in fact a real person. I don't know why on earth people would, for centuries, make her up, but yes, she was real. Come back to Earth, people. Come back.
And I find it hard to let go. The memories keep me together. Gotta fight till the end, no pressure.